Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
I'm Mike Polk. You just caught me rolling up my sleeves because we have a lot to talk about. We just watched the final primary Senate debate for the GOP here in Ohio, and it was interesting, wasn't it?
It was. There was definitely a lot of conversation.
Most interesting of the three, I would say, that we watched. I would say like they are obviously kind of swinging for the fences at this point, and it made for a more animated interaction than we've seen in the past, because we're just about a week away almost from us actually deciding which one of these people will face off against Sherrod Brown.
2 weeks, 13 days, 13
right,
days to the March 19th primary. It's going to go fast, and it's also going to feel like a very long 13 days, I think.
It will. And what did you take, or immediate reactions from that? I know that it's not up to us to discuss it necessarily, but I've got to say, as one of the, I looked at the stream at one point, and there were 198 people watching it at some point. And that's not a heck of a lot of people, but so which surprised me. Did that surprise you that not that many people were on board, or no?
It was, you know, and I always am interested to see what those numbers end up looking like at the end.
People will watch it later.
Because certain people dip in, dip out. I don't know, like, what's actually happening contemporaneously. It's not like those 198 people that you said were watching it from beginning to end or something.
And then other people are watching it on the other streams and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But still, what I'm saying is there aren't as many people at this point engaged in this as you would think there were, and that's proven by the fact that there, in a recent poll, there were like 24% of Republicans are still undecided on who they're going to vote for in this. So nights like tonight could make a big difference, and you can tell that all three candidates came in with a plan tonight to make their last stand and essentially say, this is who I am and this is why you should vote for me. And most of their answers, as we know, have been pretty similar throughout the whole process and stuff. But I did come up with here the three things. These are the three statements that I think each of them were trying to say. May I share that with
Please,
them?
I'd love to hear.
Thank you so much. Okay. Matt Dolan was saying, I'm the most moderate, I am the most genuine, and I have the best proven track record. Bernie Moreno was saying, I am supported by the former president, I'm supported by the former president, and these guys are career politicians, and I am an outsider. And Frank LaRose was sort of saying, both of these guys are not what you want right now, because Matt Dolan is a career politician, but he's too far left. And Bernie Moreno was also very far left, but is now just pretending to be further right in order to ingratiate himself. So he was kind of trying to walk that middle ground, but all three of them came in with a plan. And I think all three of them had pretty impressive moments tonight, actually.
The thing that I would add to that from Frank LaRose is that he was in the military.
And he was in the military. He did mention that a few times.
Lot. Made a lot of references to doing battle, so he wants people to know that he did serve in the military.
Right, very good point. That was major part of his message.
Yeah, so reminder, the candidates who people will be voting for on March 19th, they are current Ohio State Senator Matt Dolan, Bernie Moreno, who has been described as a business person. That seems to be the descriptor we're using for him.
Yes, he made a bunch of money selling cars, and he's a very successful businessman.
And also talked about his previous business interests that he'd had in the Middle East a bit tonight.
Yeah, touched on that.
And Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Those are the candidates, and the winner of the March 19th primary will face off against the current Democrat U.S. Senate incumbent candidate, Sherrod Brown, who'll be running again this. So we're trying to figure out who we're going to see on the November ballot, and it's a tight one.
It is.
It is a tight one.
We have some polling on that.
Yeah, I want to share one poll, and you'll share another, but this is one that came out of Emerson College, a polling survey, released earlier this month, late February, early March, I'm not exactly sure on the date, but it showed a close race between Moreno and LaRose, with 22% of Republican primary voters backing Moreno, 21% backing LaRose, and Dolan with 15%. This is in the Emerson College poll.
And one of the problems with this is there just isn't a ton of polling at this point, so it does leave us in the dark somewhat. And I don't know if that's a problem with state polling for all states or if that's an Ohio thing, but regardless, there is another poll that came out this week. It's from Survey USA, and that sounds made up, but it's a real thing because all the campaigns are really citing it and stuff, and real legitimate news organizations are. And they say that they've got Moreno finishing with 29% at this point, Matt Dolan at 27%. And LaRose at 21%. So again, that's a big difference. That has different people in different places from that other poll. That just shows you how scattershot and how inaccurate this poll, or not even inaccurate, I'll just say how all over the place this polling is. And it's hard to, how many people did they take into account, and So you just don't know. It's the uncertainty that's very...
Right, because both of those things can't be true.
Yes.
You know, in the end, we will know who wins, who came in second, who came in third.
What both of these polls show us, whichever one is more accurate, is that there's not a decided conclusion on this, is that it's not said and done, and that anybody could win this race. It does seem like that, and it seems even more like that after tonight, to me anyways.
It seems like they feel that way. It does certainly seem like they feel that way. So we've been talking a lot about what the Republican stances are. We're going to hear a little bit, though, from a Democrat here in just a minute. We have Democrat Allison Russo joining us. She is the Ohio House Minority
We got the
Leader.
leader, you guys. That's impressive.
So she'll be joining us via Zoom here in just a couple minutes, and then after that, we'll also be talking with
our good buddy Andrew Tobias. He has been providing great insight for us. He's from Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. He's been reporting on politics in Ohio since 2013, and he has been an invaluable resource for us. So we look forward to talking to him as well.
Friend of the show. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. We're going to get Allison Russo teed up, and then we'll be right back with our conversation with her. All right, welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. We are here now. We have ready to talk with us Ohio House Minority Leader Allison Russo. And just to give you a quick little recap of what she does for us here in the Ohio House, she represents House District 7. So that includes Upper Arlington, Grandview Heights, and parts of Columbus. She's serving her third term in the Ohio House and is now the minority leader for the House Democratic Caucus. So we'll welcome her right now. Representative Russo, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll ask you first, what was the item or items that stuck out to you most from the Republican Senate debate that we just watched?
Well, I think what stuck out to me most is, we just listened to an hour-long debate where we had three rich guys who essentially offered absolutely no solutions to Ohioans. They spent most of the time calling each other liars. Frankly, I'm not sure any of them should be trusted. We got no real answers. And I think this is the stark contrast to ultimately who their opponent will be, which is Sherrod Brown, who shows every day that he is working hard for Ohioans and is actually working for the issues that they care about.
Leader Russo, did you hear anything different from anybody tonight than you've heard in the past from these candidates? Did anything stand out to you where you could say they've clearly made a turn here and this is something new I haven't heard?
Yeah, no, frankly, I haven't heard anything new from these candidates. It was more of the same. The thing that struck out to me and I think probably stands out to many Ohioans is, when directly asked about their support of a national abortion ban, not a single one of these candidates actually directly answered that question. All three are on record for saying that they do support an abortion ban. And I think what is clear is none of these candidates will actually work to uphold the will of the voters who just in November voted to keep politicians out of doctors' offices. So I think that should be deeply concerning to many Ohioans. Again, more of the same, not directly answering that question.
Leader Russo, on that note, I want to ask you about something that wasn't talked about during this debate. It was the candidates' stance on support for IVF and how you think that might play into this election, in the general election on a broader scale, regardless of who it is that might be the Republican candidate.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously it wasn't asked, but again, I think anytime that we've got candidates who are not saying or have said, actually admitted that they support a national abortion ban, who are not being very clear about their support of IVF, reproductive care. We should all be deeply concerned about this because the reality is these attacks on reproductive rights, on access to abortion, on access to miscarriage care, on access to IVF, these are becoming more and more intense attacks. We fully anticipate, certainly if Republicans gain control of the Senate, that we will see more of this in terms of federal bans and federal efforts to overreach in this space. And, again, these candidates are very squishy. And I think what is clear, all of them, based on their stance on issue 1 in November, have made it clear that they don't support the will of Ohioans when it comes to these issues of family planning and, again, keeping politicians out of doctors' offices.
Leader Russo, switching to another topic that they addressed tonight, the really only real daylight we've seen in any of the on issues between any of these candidates so far, major discrepancies, I mean, is on how to handle the Ukraine-Russia situation. And Matt Dolan set himself apart tonight from Moreno and LaRose by adamantly supporting Ukraine and financial support for Ukraine. How do you think that's going to play out for them, and how will that matter in the general election if Matt Dolan were to actually win this?
Well, it is shocking to me that we have any candidates for federal office and certainly for U.S. Senate who is not absolutely clear in our support, America's support for the Ukraine, who is fighting back against Russian invasion. and Russian attacks on democracy. That is unimaginable, no matter what your political affiliation is. And, you know, I think that this is certainly an issue that will continue to come up in the general election. Listen, we don't have to guess where one of the candidates in the general election will be. Sherrod Brown, he has voted consistently to support Ukraine and to support their efforts to defend both democracy and their country from Russia's invasion. So there's no guessing there. And I think when it comes to that issue, there is a very clear winner, and that is Sherrod Brown.
I want to return actually to the issue of abortion here for just a moment, because in their response when they were asked about abortion, Moreno specifically talked about President Joe Biden's stances and Sherrod Brown's stance in that regard. Do you believe that their characterization is accurate of their stance in regards to allowing these late-term up-to-birth abortion opportunities with the way things stand currently now in the state of Ohio?
Well, first of all, they're using talking points that are not medically accurate or correct, and that's simply a diversion to not talk about what the real issue is, and that is making sure that women and families, when they are faced with these decisions, very personal decisions, that we don't have politics coming in between those decisions and what is best for them, their families, and their doctor. So, you know, I'm not going to debate inaccuracies because what they are doing is simply diverting. I think the last time Mr. Moreno talked about this issue, his solution was to have really nice people help lift strollers on airline flights. That is cold comfort to women in Ohio who are making real decisions that impact themselves and their families. And Ohioans have already spoken on this again in November. You know, we have been very clear about where we stand on this issue, and no candidate who is not firmly in support of upholding the will of the voters does not deserve the vote of voters come this November for this race.
Leader, we have to address this. All of the candidates do have one thing in common, and that's that they are all desperately trying to make sure that Sherrod Brown is linked to President Biden right now, and I think that has something to do with his polling numbers. Are you concerned with that strategy and that approach once we get to the general election, regardless of who comes out of this? Joe Biden's numbers are not strong. Do you think that that'll be a successful link that they'll be able to make, and what kind of effect do you think that'll have long term?
Well, listen, I think that Sherrod Brown has proven over and over again that he is willing to put people first and politics aside. And is willing to work with anyone who is willing to put the best interest of Ohioans first. That has been where he has always stood. That is what he consistently is working for day in and day out when he is in Ohio. And in Ohio, I think no one works harder to be in every corner of Ohio talking about the issues that Ohioans care about, fighting for the issues that Ohioans care about. And, you know, Senator Brown also has a long history of working across the aisle to get things done. Listen, we can talk about the president's popularity or his polling here in Ohio. The reality is, under the Biden administration, we have had significant amount of dollars coming into this state, investing in our infrastructure, investing in building our economy, particularly some large economic development, making sure that we are the microchip manufacturing center of the country. And, you know, Sherrod has been at the front of talking about those issues and advocating for this state. And I think that that resonates with voters, and they see that. And ultimately, I think they will make a decision based on who Sherrod Brown is and what he fights for.
Now, you're in your third term now in the House here in Ohio, so you've certainly got some experience talking with Ohio voters. I want to ask you, because something that these Republican candidates keep bringing up as what seems to be to them a major issue to Ohio voters is the issue of immigration and border control and the impact that has here in Ohio. They keep making a tie between immigration and the border control situation and fentanyl and human trafficking here specifically in Ohio. So I want to ask you first, what do you think about that connection that's being drawn there? And second, do you see that in your experience in office when you're talking to your constituents? Is that something that people are really concerned about, as concerned as they seem to be saying they are?
Well, I think certainly, issues around the addiction crisis here in the state of Ohio is a concern with many of the constituents, that we talk to around the state. Do I think that many of our constituents directly relate it to what is happening at the border? No, not always. I think they are mostly concerned about making sure that people have access to addiction treatment, that we are providing opportunities for recovery, and that seems to be the focus. Without a doubt, listen, we need to deal with the issues on the border. But here again, these Republican candidates that we saw in the debate tonight, the Republicans have been offered a real solution, a historic solution in dealing with this immigration crisis. And in the 11th hour, when a deal seemed near, it was President Trump who basically stepped in and said no, because of politics. This would not help him in November to actually come up with a real solution. And so, I think some of the debate about this that we heard tonight is very disingenuous, because there are real solutions out there today, real opportunities to invest, for example, in screening that is happening at all of our entry points. So far, the Republicans in Congress have been unwilling to put politics aside, to put people first, to put real solutions first. Here again, Sherrod Brown has been supportive of those efforts. He's been supportive of making sure that we're addressing the fentanyl crisis here in the state of Ohio. So we have one candidate, Sherrod Brown, who is very focused on solutions, putting the politics aside, and addressing an issue that impacts Ohioans. And then we've got a bunch of rich guys fighting for the approval of Donald Trump, who's saying, no, we want to put politics first and not have a real solution to this.
Leader Russo, we did have the elephant in the room tonight, a lot of discussion about Donald Trump. All three candidates are approaching this differently. Obviously, Moreno has the endorsement. Frank LaRose, all three of them, none of them would probably turn it down necessarily. Frank LaRose would like to have the endorsement, is a huge fan of Donald Trump and wants to make that clear. Matt Dolan would like that endorsement as well, probably, but also separates himself a little bit more as far as he actually specifically brought up that he is of a different temperament than Donald Trump, that he doesn't agree with how he approaches politics sometimes from a personality perspective, but that he has enacted more of Trump's policies than either of these other two candidates. How do you think all three of them did as far as approaching the Donald Trump issue, and how do you think that's going to reflect in the general election?
I think that at the end of the day, what Ohioans really care about is, are you going to be fighting for the favor of us as voters and us as Ohioans, not Donald Trump, not President Biden, but us as voters? And so we heard, again, a lot of talk, certainly about Donald Trump, but not a lot of talk about real solutions. And that is deeply concerning. And I think, Ohioans are losing out, certainly in this debate, because the focus was not on them. It was on currying the favor of the leader of their party, who is Donald Trump.
All right, Leader Russo, we want to thank you very much for your time tonight, and we hope you'll join us again as we move forward after the primary and throughout what will surely be a long election season.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Leader Russo.
All right, stick with us. When we come right back, we're going to be talking with Plain Dealer political reporter Andrew Tobias. That'll be in just a moment.
There he is. Welcome back, everybody, to Ohio Has Issues. Nice of Leader Russo to join us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We appreciate your taking the time on this Wednesday night.
Good insight there. Speaking of great insight, we have a personal friend of the show who's visited us many times now, and every time I think we talk to him, we get a little bit smarter. Isn't that the case?
I would definitely say that's true.
Cleveland.com/plain-dealer reporter Andrew Tobias has been reporting on Ohio politics since 2013, and he's with us. Andrew, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm pretty good. I'm glad the debate was over a little earlier than last time, so I'm feeling refreshed and ready to go.
Yeah, you look invigorated. You got to lean a little to the left there and show us the balloons. What are we celebrating there? Or is that just everyday balloons?
One on Saturday, actually.
Your daughter turned 1.
It was that this is the last debate, and I don't have to watch another one, but it's actually a happy occasion with my family. So.
Congratulations. That's great, man. That's
Happy birthday to your daughter.
And very tasteful balloon coloring back there, too. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so,
Well designed. Someone has an eye. All right. Andrew, you got to tell us right now, you watched this debate. You were there aren't a ton of us watching this, so we are really reliant on you for your feedback. Initial reactions from the final debate.
Yeah, I'd say that the strategy that I saw from the candidates was pretty similar. Like I said, alluded to, I've seen a couple of these now, and essentially Bernie Moreno really leans into the fact that Donald Trump's endorsed him. You saw him rebut a lot of criticism from his opponents. If there's something that he's vulnerable about, he would say, well, don't you think Donald Trump wouldn't have endorsed me if he thought that was the case, right? We saw Matt Dolan emphasize that he has some positions that he might get criticized over, but he's trying to present himself as basically being authentic and being the guy that he is. Then Frank LaRose kind of went on the attack against both, I'd say, and I saw him deliver some new one-liners that were similar to me and are new to me as opposed to what I've seen before. So I'd say that the biggest thing that I noticed that was different, though, was that you might think that there's been some polling recently that suggested the race is closer than people might have thought. And so maybe Bernie Moreno would have responded to that by going on the attack or something. But he basically still positioned himself as the front runner, didn't really engage with his opponents much. And then I really noticed it was conspicuous that he made a point to defend Donald Trump when the premise of a question was slightly critical. He said it again and again. And, that really stood out to me as something that was different from him.
Anything that was striking you in terms of anything you saw from the candidates that was not in line with anything they'd said previously that came to mind for you?
Well, I thought it was interesting. There was a question about illegal immigration, and Frank LaRose has this race has really tried to kind of go to the right, and Bernie Moreno is taking out the Trump position and kind of basically daring the other candidates to go there with him as being as hardline as possible. And so, for example, Matt Dolan has said before that he would support a path for legal status, basically for people who are here without documentation, but who are willing to work and haven't committed a crime. He didn't initially say that, and the moderator actually pulled him out to get him to state that. Conspicuously, though, Frank LaRose had initially, when this came up at an event last October that I was at, he mentioned that the idea that you would deport millions of people, everybody who's illegal here, who might be somewhere in the 10 million people range. He called it impossible, that it would crash the economy. He kind of cleaned that up in subsequent debates and said that he meant that it was logistically unfeasible to do it right away. He just didn't mention that at all tonight. So that was an example of something where, again, there's like this dance of how hard can you be on immigration, and LaRose is kind of trying to compete with Moreno for that distinction. And so you saw him kind of just drop this point altogether. And Bernie didn't go there because I don't know that he's necessarily trying to call attention to the other candidates. So that's something that stood out to me.
When they start getting into the minutia about, you said this specifically 4 years ago, you said this 2 years ago, you kind of contradicted yourself here. Do you have any idea how much of that actually translates through to Ohio voters? That is to say, do you know if they care about these contrasts? Is there any kind of polling that says that people are actually paying attention to if somebody contradicts themselves at one point or another?
So it is kind of hard to tell these guys apart. There are a couple of issues where they do distinguish themselves, including what I mentioned earlier about immigration. But I know all these candidates. I've covered them for years, and I basically think of them as holding very similar positions. And it's kind of a matter of really how they're selling themselves in this race, how they're cozying up to Trump. Are they the Trump candidate? Are they not the Trump candidate? So does this affect voters? I do think that for somebody like Bernie Moreno, who's never run statewide before, sometimes if you're an established candidate, I'll take Sherrod Brown as an example, where he holds some pretty liberal positions in a state like Ohio that's kind of right-leaning, but I've heard people say things like, I don't agree with him on the issues, but I think he fights, or it's just kind of like where they give somebody a pass for not agreeing with him politically. Bernie Moreno doesn't have that. He's someone that a lot of people, I mean, I know in Cleveland, maybe people have bought cars or heard from him or that kind of thing, but statewide, a lot of people have not heard from him, have never heard of him until a few months ago. You know, if perhaps, I mean, I've talked to people at these events that basically hadn't heard of him until the day before they saw him. So there are people who, you know, he's just not well known. And so, you know, I think LaRose's strategy tonight was to try to point out these instances of him being inconsistent, and that might make somebody sort of like, basically it's like a trust issue. So are people going to look this up and see like whether or not he said this or that, or whether that person said this? I don't know. I wish that the moderators actually could have thrown up some of these, you know, documents on screen and showed people in real time. But I guess that's the gamble, is that very few people watch these debates from start to finish, and so they basically just assume that maybe people won't do the homework.
One of the things that we keep hearing from these candidates in their talking points is that they believe the economy is very important to the Ohio voter. They also are saying that immigration and the border issues are very important to the Ohio voter, and are talking about ways in which they believe immigration is directly impacting Ohioans in terms of, they mentioned fentanyl, they mentioned human trafficking. I'm just wondering, in terms of your coverage and the things that you've been writing about politically over years, does that resonate with you? Does that seem what is to be important to Ohio voters in terms of the reaction you get from your reporting and what you see happening?
So is the question about the economy, or is it about the immigration and border issue?
Both of those. I'd like the answer to both of those things.
So the economy is one of those things that everybody realizes, that kind of everybody lives with it. It kind of reminds me of, I graduated from college during the Great Recession. I'll kind of always remember that it was hard to get a job at that time. And so, when you go to the grocery store, and things have gotten better. I mean, the eggs aren't $4 or $5 a dozen anymore, but it's still, much more expensive than it was before. And that's a reality that people see, especially if you're someone who, if you don't have as much money and you basically need to try to make ends meet. I would say that I tend to view immigration as being more of a cultural issue. I mean, it's definitely something that affects the southern border. There are kind of broader concerns about whether there's national security implications. People have tied in the past the drug trafficking problem in Ohio. There is definitely a pathway from Mexico. It's this is very detailed, but it's, a lot of that stuff comes in through ports of entry and not necessarily being smuggled across the border. So it's kind of simplified, but that is something that Republican voters here care about. It's definitely a problem that affects the country. And I think even when you see Democrats, the idea of this border security bill that failed in the Senate, Democrats basically acknowledge that it's a problem. So, the issue is something that Republican voters care about. I've seen it come up, in several races now, and it's both of those issues are things that are on people's minds for sure.
There was a stark moment tonight that I actually caught our attention. We were watching the debate and we're like, wow. And it was when seemed very intentional when Bernie Moreno essentially professed his appreciation and love for Donald Trump and said what a great guy he was and everything, and just said he's a very good guy, and just tried to support him in that way and try to essentially say, all you people are being kind of mean to him. That obviously seemed like something he went into with a plan. What do you think his plan was there, and what do you think the end result will be?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I noticed that, Moreno has been saying that Trump endorsed me. That's really the cornerstone of his campaign. But he went a step further by going out of his way to defend Trump. There's a point where I actually couldn't completely make out what was happening because his microphone, I think either he was cut or he's talking over somebody else. But essentially, if there was a question that was premised where it was like, the question that, really that's easy to explain is, the moderator said that Donald Trump is a polarizing political figure. So how are you going to appeal to people who might not like him? And that was when, Bernie launched into his defense and saying, this is unfair. Donald Trump's a really good guy. He's being persecuted. This needs to be said. And there are other examples of him doing that too. I would definitely, it's been reported that Trump is unlikely to come here and rally for Moreno before the March 19 election. That's something that would be really important for him, because when Trump shows up, it's a big deal. It's a spectacle. You draw in people who don't follow politics closely. It's something that people talk about. And then the people who show up end up on a list that campaigns can then send them stuff and remind them to vote. So it matters if he comes. I think it made the difference in the 2018 campaign, kind of looking back, for example. So if whether it's trying to make the case to Trump that he's fighting for him and trying to make a good impression, trying to convince him to come to the state, that's one conclusion someone could draw. But it also could just be trying to reinforce the idea. I mean, it's not bad politics in a Republican primary to try to be very, very, very pro-Trump. We just saw him clinch the nomination, and he's getting like 75% of the vote. So there could be a simple answer to that. Just it's so consistent with his campaign theme of just pointing out that Trump endorsed him and just kind of completely tying himself politically to him.
Do you have any kind of an indication on why we might not expect Trump to have a rally here in Ohio in support of Moreno, since we keep hearing from him so much about the endorsement?
Yeah, these things tend to just kind of happen. It would be unusual compared to previous campaign cycles for him not to come. When I asked Moreno about this last week, he specifically referenced that Trump has a lot of conflicts with like his many legal cases that he's defending himself against, criminal and civil. You also generally just hear, I'm by no means am I like a Trump reporting expert or anything like that. I kind of focus on Ohio politics, but that with running for president, he's just not as engaged with these kind of like state level elections as he might have been in the past. Whereas, he's often seen these as like a referendum on his influence or, kind of got more hands on and stuff like that. So there's some evidence that he's not as engaged with these kinds of races as he normally would be. And I guess, it's easy to see that he'd have a lot of other things on his plate right now.
Andrew, they always talk for about an hour. We always pull about 4 sentences from that entire hour as the media that are actually where they're saying something different or interesting, and then we talk about those 4 sentences for about a week. What do you think those 4 moments were? What do you think those sentences were? Did you hear anything that what are the things that we're going to be talking about on the news throughout Ohio based on that debate? What are the sound clips?
Well, so I think that there's an exchange between Moreno and LaRose, and it's almost hard to recreate because it just kind of went through a couple of different subjects and there's some explanation that's required. But the moderator actually cut the mic, trying to kind of get things back on. Essentially, Frank LaRose has an attack that he uses against Moreno that Moreno sat on the Cleveland Foundation's board during a time that it was funding abortion providers, and so that somehow shows that Moreno's not a real conservative. And what Moreno said was that, and he said this in the past, that he didn't have a role approving individual grants, that it was donor advised, that some people give money that it's earmarked for these specific purposes. So they're kind of like explaining that. Moreno brought up something completely unrelated, which is that there was a call this week that LaRose was reportedly supposed to have with a group called No Labels. It's a centrist political group that LaRose has been affiliated with in the past. They are trying to recruit a third-party challenger to Trump and Biden this year. It just went back and forth. And then LaRose had like a one-liner that he responded, and saying that I have a label, I'm a conservative Republican. I don't, and then you're not, you say that it's a donor advised fund, but you want to be a donor advised senator. So like, it's a zinger. It's kind of clearly he came in with this thing in his back pocket. He used both of them back to back, but the exchange was interesting. It kind of shows how testy things have gotten. There is some stuff kind of built into that. Beyond that, I mean, I would just say like these candidates have just been very clear about what their aim is. Moreno's saying Trump has endorsed me. Matt Dolan has said I'm the most consistent of these 3 guys. And then LaRose, he's pointed to his military experience, and he's also called his opponents corporate elites because he lives a relatively normal life because he only makes 6 figures, not 7. So that's kind of the gist of it. And to the extent that that can be distilled into like, a soundbite here or there, I guess, maybe somebody else can do that. I'm not sure.
I am hearing though that you don't think anything necessarily moved the needle tonight where voters who were on the fence might all of a sudden say, oh, that's my person right there. Anything stand out in that way?
So I think, so there's a couple of things I'll answer with that with. One is that often people don't really watch these debates from start to finish, but they get clipped by the campaigns. They get shared on social media. Those can make a difference. We saw in 2022 a couple of candidates almost get in a fist fight. It was really embarrassing. It was kind of funny. People talked about it, but there's nothing like that tonight. So that's sort of in the sense that nobody made a huge mistake or anything like that. You will see the candidates kind of promote these things and try to, they raise money, honestly. But if somebody was starting from start to finish, I thought Frank LaRose had an interesting opening statement. He basically asked viewers to ask themselves, like, who do you trust on stage here? And, he had a couple of, Moreno has positioned himself as being, I don't want to say far right, but just the most kind of conservative hardline candidate, in the field. But he has a past of writing on our website on cleveland.com in 2019 that he supported the state's green energy mandates, for example. And so LaRose called attention to these things. I don't think that Moreno adequately explained them. So maybe somebody might wonder, like, why isn't he answering this question? And it could be that Moreno's in the driver's seat, that Trump's endorsed him. He doesn't need to deal with, these pot shots, but maybe somebody might come away with the conclusion. And then, you saw stuff like LaRose trying to put Matt Dolan on the spot, ask him to endorse Donald Trump on the spot, because Dolan hasn't run as an anti-Trump Republican, but he's kind of like, in some ways, run the kind of campaign that a Republican would have run before Trump even was on the scene. So he said, why don't you endorse Donald Trump on the spot? And Dolan didn't use the word endorse, he used support. Will normal people notice that? I'm not really sure, but I know that candidates do think that those two words are different from each other. So anytime like a candidate wasn't forthcoming immediately with a response, maybe somebody might think they're trying to hide something. I mean, I do think that there's a large percentage of undecided voters in this race. Maybe they're not sure about any of these guys. Maybe they would have a conclusion that they would draw from just seeing how they answered these questions. But, that notwithstanding, I mean, I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning, that I view these candidates as having very similar views. So, distinguishing them mostly comes down to, like, are they with Trump? Has Trump endorsed them? And then they also have the biographical things that make them very different from each other.
Last thing, and then we'll let you go, Andrew. You did mention they're very similar candidates, and we've seen some very similar polling as far as different polls, but I'll say that they're kind of grouped together. Nobody's like running away with it so far. Do you think those polls are accurate? And if you had to guess, like right now, are these polls legitimate? Are these candidates this close together, or is somebody a little further apart and the polls just aren't registering that right now?
So I've come to believe polls a little bit more. I think they've performed better as far as accurately forecasting races in Ohio in recent elections, after they've had a pretty bad run in 2016, 2018, and 2020. So, I mean, I think that they are probably painting an accurate picture that Moreno's probably leading, but it's pretty close. But you do see these individual the super PACs supporting these campaigns kind of like having their own polls, internally they've produced, like making their guy look a little bit better. I asked people about, do they think the race is close? I think the sort of consensus is that, Moreno's winning, that he's doing well, but there's sort of questions about why is he doing better, and so he'll sort of have to prove himself. But, what I really do to try to answer this kind of question is see what the campaigns are doing. We've seen Moreno and his allies really start going after Matt Dolan recently. They started spending more money on TV. So the candidates are acting like the race is close. So, I presume that it is as well.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much for your insight. We appreciate you being with us. Of course, we'll hope to have you back here again real soon.
All right, thanks, guys.
Whether you like it or not, thanks, Andrew. That's Andrew Tobias from Cleveland.com, The Plain Dealer, helping us out again and getting a little smarter.
Yes. All right, stick with us. We'll be back in just a minute after a little break here on Ohio Has Issues.
Welcome back, everybody, to Ohio Has Issues. Well, I learned a lot tonight. Did you?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I will say, I'll give you my, first of all, Andrew Tobias, wonderful. Thank you for his perspective.
As always.
Yeah.
Yes.
But one thing that really struck me from this debate was just a very smart question from the moderator, Cherie Palello. And I got a chance to talk to her actually before this debate happened. So I got a little bit of an insight into kind of what she was planning to ask and where she kind of expected it to go. She didn't mention this though. I thought that was a very smart question of her to ask the candidates in what way they would be able to reach across the aisle and work together. And it did not seem like those candidates really wanted to answer that question. They did not want to talk about collaborating past the aisle.
She did a nice job. I thought that the moderator did a very nice job. And I thought that actually that was our most vibrant of the three. Well, we had two debates, and what was the other one? A forum?
Two debates and a forum.
And a forum. And in this one, you can tell we're getting down to it. That's what it felt like tonight to me. It felt like tick, tick, tick. And they're all looking at the relatively scarce polling that they have. They're hearing from inside the party. They're hearing from their own campaigns and stuff. And they're hearing people saying, you've got to go out there and stand out tonight. And you can tell that all three of them took their swing and tried to make themselves stand out in some distinct way from each other. Because that's the tricky thing, as we've been mentioning all night long, is their views and their policies and the things that they're talking about don't differ that much. So their personalities need to. And that's what they at least tried to do tonight. And we'll have to find out from Ohio voters whether anybody liked what they saw.
A lot of conversation about trust tonight from them too. That was a recurring theme that seemed to come up and pointing to things that they said. And we talked about it a little bit. We talked about it with Andrew Tobias about, whether these inconsistencies that we've seen, they're quoted. We have people literally recorded saying things differently previously that they're saying now, whether that will make a difference with these primary voters.
That's true. And according to, obviously, we also had Leader Russo on, for a Democrat who, unsurprisingly, unimpressed by the debate tonight and wasn't impressed with the candidates, but we kind of knew that going in, but we wanted to have a contrast there, obviously. You just heard from Republicans for an hour, and we wanted to make sure that we heard their point of view as well. And unsurprisingly, she is not a fan, but also very good to hear from her, and thank you for joining us, Leader Russo.
Absolutely. Well, I think that does it for us for this week on Ohio Has Issues.
Yeah, and we'll be back next week and all the way until November to make sure that you guys are up to date as we can possibly make you through the wisdom of others here on Ohio Has Issues.
Little reminder for everyone, we are typically live on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. We started a little bit later today.
Debate thing.
Because of the debate happening from 7 to 8. And then you can catch us on the WKYC YouTube page afterwards, on WKYC Plus, on the streaming apps in Toledo and Columbus as well here in Ohio with our fellow
This goes all the way to
stations.
Toledo?
All the way to Toledo.
Who knew?
All the way. Shout out to people watching in Toledo. We appreciate you. Thank you so much to those WTOL Plus.
Go Mud Hens.
Go Mudhens.
Trust
yes.
me. Trust
Okay,
me.
I will. I'll trust you on that. And then you can find us on all podcast platforms as well after the fact. And we will have a special episode as well on March 19th, which is a Tuesday, which is Ohio primary election day, when we will have at least one answer as to who's going to be on that November ballot.
Early voting's open, folks. Get to the polls.
Okay. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back next week.
Bye now.